So thank you for coming. And so I'm going to ask these two good people a couple of questions each, and then we'll open it to the audience. And I wanted to start with you, Margo, because as you pointed out, you were barely cognizant when this happened. And what's happened since then, I just remember how young the Oslo movement was, what a critical role Meretz, which has, in a way, some of Meretz's parties were actually based in organizations that were affiliated with what became Partners for Progressive Israel. Meretz had 15 seats in the 1992 elections. It was a time of tremendous hope. The young people were really tired of the wars. Israel was very outward looking. And now we are faced with a generation of Israelis your age that are insular, that are inward looking, that are more conservative than their parents, who have hardly any memory of Oslo. Daniel Powler, who wrote this show, who wrote the books and music, told me one of the things that led him to write the show was talking to high school students and realizing that Oslo for them was just a line in a history book. So how do we reconcile that, and how do we figure out, how do you, working in the job you're doing, how do you get that awareness going again? Is there any hope out there?
Thanks so much, and again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and for Voices for putting on this incredible production. I will actually, I think, start in response with the sort of new iteration of Meretz, or the pieces of Meretz that are still live in the Israeli political scene, both within the Demokratim Party, the new sort of merger of Labor and Meretz, but also of my colleague Moshe Raz, who was a Meretz Knesset member. And when we spoke most recently, when I was last in Israel, he told me that a huge part of his sort of less electoral political work is actually going to high school students, and then especially students who are in their preparatory pre-army program years, and telling them about what it meant to be part of this process, and about what partnership and his lived experiences looked like with Palestinians, for exactly this reason, to say, this isn't sort of lost history, this is a live project, and it's something that's still possible. And he said the response to person to person in that room, hearing oh, you can actually do it, and it's not something that either exists in a history book or is a dream to be laughed at or even ridiculed, but rather is a way of life that is still actually available, and is a practice of not just politics but interpersonal relationships that's available. He says is some of the work that he shared with me that feels the most hopeful and the most enlivening. I will say, in ways big and small, so much of the narrative organizing work that we do at Partners is sort of sometimes it feels like sticking a finger a little bit in, not quite in the dam, but actually being a little bit of a narrative irritant, of speaking on college campuses and saying, but do you know about XYZ? I can think especially about actually a time when I was speaking at NYU right after they had shut down their encampment. And I was invited to speak alongside a Palestinian American colleague who is from Beit Jala, now leads a Lutheran congregation in Dyker Heights in Brooklyn, not so far from me, and was asked to come by the Episcopalian students, the Muslim Students Associations, and the anti-Zionist, nascent student group that had just started at NYU. And I was like, you've read our mission statement, right? Am I coming here just to be yelled at, or do you want to talk? And I was so shocked. Actually, what these students needed most was serious pastoral care. So many of them in the encampment said, I was recruited to this school as an activist. I was told this was the highlight of my being on this campus, and I then lived my values, and my school brought called the police on me. But also actually a surprising openness to hearing another piece or being nudged slightly. Especially even when speaking about, why aren't more Israelis aware of what's happening in Gaza? I said, are you aware of how different the Hebrew language media looks right now compared to English media, French media, Arabic media? Are you aware that when Israelis turn on their TV, this is not an absolution, but just a reality, right? That most images of Gaza people in Israel have been seeing the last 2 years, up until about this summer, were grainy, black and white radar images of military maneuvers and explosions. They weren't seeing the images we all were seeing of starving children, or of tents on fire, or a host of these lines of mass exodus that I will say to my eyes look like Srebrenica, watching people move through Gaza. And it wasn't this moment of like, oh, now I see and I'm so wrong, but rather actually that people are willing to be unsettled into asking deeper questions. It's not a big audacious hope, but I think it's again this person-to-person practice of unsettling and irritating into a wider and more complex understanding of reality that I'm still finding really enlivening in what is very hard work.
David, when we spoke, you talked about wanting to talk about the fragility then and now of peace and of democracy. What do you, I mean, you were around then, you were on the Hill, you were with RAC, and your heart was broken. I'm sure like all our hearts were broken. But now, if anything, both in this country and in the Israeli-Palestinian area, it seems even more fragile. Do you think that's right?
Tragically, it is. In both America and Israel, we're seeing very similar attacks on the fundamental structures of democracy in those institutions. And I do want to come to that, but if you can indulge me for a minute, I just want to respond to a couple of things that I saw here that brought back such vivid memory, and I know there are some, Paul and others, who have been doing this long enough to remember some of the earliest parts of what I'm going to say. Here, my life is coextensive with the life of Israel, and you can look at it in different phases, from 48 to 67, from 67 until the assassination of Rabin, or going further, I would say, till the end of Oslo. To the beginning of the Second Intifada and the period of time since that. It is difficult to convey to people who didn't live through that second period how powerful the belief was in what merit stood for, in what peace now stood for, in what partners, peace, antecedent entities all stood for. We really believed that if you gave peace a chance, it could actually work. So it's important to point out that the reaction to Oslo was extremist on both sides for the first years, but then as Oslo continued, piece by piece, there was cooperation between the PA and the Israeli authorities and the military and intelligence authorities on both sides that almost brought terrorism to an end. The lowest period of time since terrorism began, since '64 when the PLO began, he had the lowest number of terrorist incidents and deaths from terrorism were the last few years of Oslo. So it isn't a theory that it could actually happen. We actually have an example of the profound difference Israelis and Palestinians working together can have in terms of their mutual interests. Here, I was living there in 99, 2000, right before the end of it. I remember going every Thursday night to Ramallah to, what was it, the Blue Flamingo, a jazz club that was there. And Israeli and Palestinian jazz musicians would play together every Thursday night, joined by American Jewish musicians who were over there. And there was a music school in Ramallah teaching Palestinian kids music, and they would all come, and after the first hour and a half of the professionals performing, then all of the kids were integrated into it, and it was such a vibrant picture of what was possible and the potential of that moment, and it was shattered by the Second Intifada, triggered in part by many factors, but Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount. Here, this and what has happened since. One can also demarcate things by 67 and afterwards, and this simple, naive belief that now the Palestinians and the Arab countries would have to sue for peace. I remember, I'm old enough to remember that vividly, that was the feeling. and really underestimating the corrupting power of the occupation in every aspect of Israeli life and Palestinian life. That was happening simultaneous to the period of Oslo, and the nature of which really undercut so much of that potential that was possible at that time. And what you saw was a predecessor to what we see now on the democracy issues, in terms of setting up two separate structures of justice, of law, that the occupation represented, and the willingness to live with that, the willing to live with the injustice of it. And now we're seeing it manifesting itself in undercutting the free media in the country, which has been there structurally from the beginning in terms of the media's censorship of anything that it could define as having to do with national security, the definition of which has expanded substantially. And God bless Haaretz, who were not for Haaretz, you would see or hear very little of what was actually going on. The consolidation of media by forces close in both countries to the right-wing powers that are in a country, the attack on the judicial structure, on the focus on the Supreme Court an issue, but much more widespread, the ability to control who are going to appoint justices, the undercutting of gatekeepers on both sides, here that we're seeing the doing away with the legal advisors as independent entities in Israel, and with the inspectors general here in the United States. This is a perilous moment. The one optimistic line I would give you, Steve Levitsky, the Harvard sociologist and political theorist who wrote the book How Democracies Die, which if you hadn't read it, I strongly represent, had a great piece 3 weeks ago in Haaretz, a lengthy piece, comparing the damage to democracy in Israel here, and concluding that something extraordinary about Israel was that some of the damage we're seeing here, not quite parallel to what we're seeing there, in a couple of regards. One is the attack on higher institutions of learning, not quite as pervasive in Israel as here. But the important thing he said is the public, the people of Israel, the willingness of the civic world to rise up against the government, as manifested in the peaceful protests week after week after week on the judges and then the hostages challenging the war here, that potential to be able to put limits on it is enormous there, and has been totally quiescent, overwhelmingly quiescent here in the face of the second Trump administration about it. He actually thinks there's a better shot at reversing this in Israel than it is here now, but so long as the occupation continues, it's never going to end, and that is the context for what the remarkable performances that we saw tonight.
Sure.
I think just on that note of whether or not Israeli democracy can be resurrected into sort of a living, democratic, liberal democracy. One thing I'll note about the age gap that you brought up, Ron, is that most of my age peers in Israel who have grown up in the post-Oslo process have been hermetically sealed, not from the outside world, but actually from day-to-day interaction with Palestinian peers. And not just from peers, but from intellectual history, grappling the political diversity of the Palestinian world, the diversity of the Palestinian experience. People that I know and have grown up with who are now living in settlements, especially liberal settlements like Gush Etzion, in some ways being raised in the American South, that makes me cringe to hear them be like, well, I know Palestinians because they bag my groceries at Rami Levy. Right smacks to me so much of my community's integrated. And in some ways there's a real truth that even in these pro-democracy bastions like Tel Aviv, there is so much internal pressure, actually not even to mention or to bring up the occupation, and naming the occupation as a part of or even a root cause of the degradation of a democracy in Israel among many on what I think in Israel people would refer to as the Israeli left, but increasingly is sort of a liberal center to a center right, is, that's disruptive. That's disunifying, to bring up the occupation. This is a sealed conversation, not in that we're not interested in talking to the developed world or the outside world, but in that it's Israeli qua Israeli interests. And to name the occupation and to resist the occupation is seen as something that is also damaging to a liberal to left cause of saving Israeli democracy. I've spoken to many Israeli expats, even living here in the US, when they participate as expats in movements around, against the judicial coup, who say things like, I feel like I had to come out as being against the occupation in House meetings where we were all talking about how terrible Netanyahu was. It was like Netanyahu's corruption somehow started once he was elected, and not while he was on the balcony at Kikar Zion, calling Rabina a Rodev.
One thing that struck me about 1992, having been an Israeli citizen, I'm still an Israeli citizen, living in Israel as an Israeli citizen then, is and the oncoming of Oslo is that both nations felt pretty good about themselves. Israel, it sounds stupid, but these things are important. Israel had won a basketball championship in the late 70s. It won Miss Universe. It won the Eurovision twice. I think actually 3 times by the time Oslo rolled around. The Palestinians had the first intifada. The Palestinians caught the attention of the world with an intifada that at least was perceived. And in Israel as well, and among the Israeli military as well, is aimed mostly as military, as legitimate. And I think that helped to pave the way. Now you have a situation where Israel, both sides are eliminationist, or there's a lot of eliminationist rhetoric on both sides. And I don't know how and I don't think either side has anybody that wants to enable their feeling good about themselves. It's Palestinians can't wear keffiyehs. You can't wear a keffiyeh in the United States. It's seen as a hate symbol, and Zionism is considered to be is seen as a hate movement by the other side. How do you get past that?
That's such an easy question. I'm going to give it to Margo.
I will say vis-a-vis the Palestinian cause, I actually really want to lift up a growing Palestinian feminist movement, both within Israel and within the West Bank and still in Gaza. Is really the place that I look to for a different kind of public, international facing vision of what it means to be Palestinian. People, especially in the Standing Together movement within Israel, like Rula Daoud, who recently, unsuccessfully, but recently very publicly challenged sort of this old order of who gets to speak for Palestinian citizens of Israel, very publicly, and she is, while I think being only a couple years older than I, is also very invested in mentoring these young women who are sometimes in college, sometimes not even yet in college. I'm thinking of Angie Matar, Amira Muhammad, and like countless other women like them who are using social media, who are using new platforms like podcasting, and often speaking in English, particularly to broadcast a really different vision of what it means to be Palestinian and what it means to be, like, have an intersectional feminist analysis and saying, we are fighting many things that once characterized Palestinian society as queer people and as women, and we are also fighting for our visibility and rights as Palestinians at the same time, and that can all be one piece. I think it's very challenging to both power structures that they're up against in a way that I find just like incredible and feel very excited about. I would say the Zionism piece, I feel like, when I first came into this role a year and a half ago, a lot of people were like, can we just have a new word, please? They're like, I want a word where I'm not pro-Palestinian, I'm not Zionist or pro-Israel, but I really just want to belong to this. I feel like I'm part of this third group and I really want a name for it. And I'm like, why don't we do the work and let the label arrive rather than being like so worried about what we're going to call this? But I do feel like there is a conversation that's very uncomfortable, even within the Zionist left, to have a conversation about what Zionism means to many Jewish people, right? Which is an extraordinarily rich political history, and kind of many shades and spectrums of ideologies and conversations about what Jewish sovereignty and Jewish nationalism can look like, and the lived experience of Zionism as it has been realized in the lives of Palestinian people in the land. And to be actually willing, I'm not saying that there's a magic way to resolve that gap, but a willingness to acknowledge both of those things at the same time and to sit in that gap, again, is deeply discomforting, but I think actually necessary to have any kind of evolving conversation. Otherwise, we're just shutting the door again on instead of being in a shared room, we just have to retreat to our own separate rooms where it has to mean one thing, and it has always meant one thing, be that Palestinian nationalism or Jewish or Israeli nationalism.
Here, here.
The Oslo happened because of Rabin coming to a conclusion. There likely was not a military answer to securing Israel's security in the long run. I still remember, were you at the Mayflower after the signing of Oslo when he spoke to all the Jews who came? I tried for years to get hold of a recording of this speech, but it wasn't pressed covering it live or anything, and the Israeli government was not helpful in getting it. It was one of the most remarkable speeches I've ever heard that Rabin gave, amongst many remarkable speeches about Oslo and the potential of Oslo. But at one point he just said, look, there are three choices. The first is the Kahani option, which would be a betrayal of the lessons and the values of the Jewish people and Jewish history, and would make us a pariah in the world. It's a vision that we're very close to seeing potentially actualized now. Second is the status quo, and I refuse to condemn generation after generation of our young people becoming a police force of an ever-growingly hostile, angry people who want their, and I don't remember what the word was, he never talked about a Palestinian state. He talked about autonomy, and I don't remember exactly what the word was. And he said, third is peace, and it will not be an easy path. There will be detours and obstacles along the way, but we have the possibility for another option. And each time something would happen, it led to some kind of effort at peace. The first Intifada, the second Intifada pushed Barak and Omer to recognize that there had to be a different way to explore. I don't know what the outcome will be. I know how it feels right now with such deep distrust, even amongst some of your partners in Israel. I can't think about a two-state solution right now. It's a conversation we just can't have right now. But I don't know what the lessons will be after a period of time, after whatever commission comes out of this to actually assess what happens, what the impact will be when finally Gaza opens up and journalists and scholars are able to actually get in there and report on what happened. You have paradoxical tensions. Everything held. All of the peace agreements, the Abraham Accords, they pretty much all held. The potential of Saudi Arabia coming into it still is a potential. So what's the incentive for the right-wingers to say we can't have our cake and eat it too? On the other hand, I think it will be very clear very soon that the military force in 2 years of fighting did not destroy Hamas. And it's not going to destroy Hamas. That's not the path that's going to do it. It remains to be seen what the lessons and the outcome of all of this will be. But we can help write what that is. We can help write it by being supportive of forces here in the American political scene who are pro-Israel but questioning the nature that the special relationship has played out and looking for a more effective way to protect American values and American interests, and from their perspective, what they believe Israel's long-term interests are. Here, the politics you and I know from much of our careers is breaking down in terms of what it means to be pro-Israel today, although pioneers have been making that argument for generations. Here, I was one of the 7 founders of Bray Rock, for the first of the Jewish organizations to call for an end to the occupation in 1973. Here. And indulge me one more. I was struck by the Barbra Streisand thing. So I don't know how many people in this room are old enough to remember. Around the room, some. Here, but in 1977, on the 30th anniversary, Washington's own Charlie Fishman, the founder of the DC Jazz Festival here, actually produced a show for the 30th anniversary of Israel that appeared on CBS. And it was a who's who, from Henry Fonda to Mikhail Baryshnikov to Henry Winkler, but the ending of it was Golda Meir in the square in Jerusalem. I mean, a mass of people celebrating this birthday. And here, Barbra Streisand in New York, talking back and forth to each other. And Barbra Streisand did sing People. And then at the end sang Hatikva with candles lit in both countries. It was such an extraordinary moment here. Subsequently, I had the opportunity, Barbara kind of befriended the Religious Action Center, supported some of our work, and I had the opportunity in our last concert to take a remarkable figure, Ruth Calderon, here, who is a secular scholar of Talmud, who gave this memorable speech, her inaugural speech on the floor of the Knesset, about what Jewish values have to say about in Israel that would be democratic and Jewish and strong in both here. And I actually took her to the concert here, and then took her back to meet Barbara, and the two of them became fast friends as well. So I love the Barbra Streisand thing because it kind of related with my dear friend Charlie and Barbara's role in my own life and career here.
Would like to ask a question. Go ahead.
So I'd be interested, first I want to say that I thought the play was just amazingly humanizing. You know, we could really see the humanity in every person, even the lunatic. And I'm just curious, was it a religious lunatic or a nationalist lunatic?
Both.
Yeah. It was the two first. And so we're seeing that, and I'm actually kind of hopeful right now. There are spaces where there's less of that. Lebanon, maybe it'll become a real country, right? Gaza, half of it could become something new. Do you see some hope in some place where people would just be human beings without debating, well, is it this one killing the judges, and this one is the intersectional feminists, and this one's doing this? Is there a place for people to just be peaceful human beings in the near future?
Go ahead.
I'd love to see that here in the United States. How many of us actually had a conversation where we listened to a MAGA supporter about what they have? I mean, the divisions are so great in both countries. One of the secrets of every single thing that I think this audience would regard as a social achievement in America in the 20th century happened because of a bipartisan coalition of decency on Capitol Hill, and nonpartisan, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious coalitions of decency in every community across America. Here, we really are, we've lost that. And it's hard to see how you get from here to there without, in both countries, they've grown further and further apart. And I think the allies of the groups that are represented by Partners for Peace are so distant from the right-wing settlers that there are places in the army where they'll cross, but if they become the exceptions rather than the rule, and that is a peril in both countries.
I would politely push back, and having just spent actually 2 weeks because of a recent family funeral in Alabama and North Carolina. I would say actually both in Israel and in the United States, where the most exciting, hopeful organizing is happening to me is in the South. It is where people, I think, have had to sit with the reality of actually both economic and racial marginalization for so long, and actually have a history that has often been suppressed of coalition building. We're seeing some of the most exciting leaders who are willing to work across ethnic boundaries, racial boundaries, national boundaries, coming out of the periphery in Israel South. I think particularly my colleagues like Avi Dabush, who is a Mizrahi, recently ordained rabbi, member of Emeritus. He's the current head of Rabbis for Human Rights Israel and on the board of A Land for All, like on the cutting edge of so much of what it means to preserve a humane Jewish national project, a religious project in Israel. And I don't think it's a mistake that like he comes out of the periphery, or that somebody like Naama Lazimi, right, like is very proudly and publicly a Moroccan Jewish traditional woman who grew up like not in a main city center, but like in a more suburban north. And similarly within the United States, like seeing what a lot of my friends and colleagues are doing on the ground, whether it's the long-standing work that's been done between Raphael Warnock and the rabbis at the temple in Atlanta, or even like smaller communities, people like the Yellowhammer Fund that has been working to provide women with, and people actually of all genders, right, with like access to reproductive justice as that access has gotten tighter and tighter and tighter, often very under the table because these networks have actually existed for years. And people are just noticing and funding and thinking about activating, honestly, these leftists that have been marginalized within the Israeli conversation and within the US conversation. I don't have to imagine what it's like to sit down with somebody from MAGA. I just hung out with my stepfather, who was born and raised in Alabama, and was shocked to find out that neoliberalism means Ronald Reagan. I was like, I'm going to hold your hand when we talk about Israel-Palestine. We're going to do it. But it's happening. I think we just need to fund and pay attention to the spaces where it's happening and actually invest in the people who've been doing the work for decades.
Amen.
We don't differ with that. I agree 100%. Indulge me, since we've hit the end of this, just a personal note. Here, just to put a human face on, again, the occupation and what it does to undercut everything that this could represent about the potential of what peace might mean. I have a son who's in his mid-30s, Daniel, D, we call him. And Didi spent 5 months last year on the West Bank doing protective presence with the communities in Matzapayata, but Al-Magir, which is a village he spent a lot of time in with family, the Abunaim family, and Rabbi Abunaim, a farmer, construction worker, working just every day just to help his family survive and to make it in this terrible period of time. Was arrested and put into administrative detention for at least 6 months, which is normal. That means no access to a lawyer, no access to his family, no access to his friends, no legal recourse at all in terms of what to do. Here, Danny had been befriended by then. He himself was detained by the police, and with his hands cuffed behind his back was roughed up by the police. He's a musician who broke his wrist here. But, he's Jewish, so he got to go to Hadassah Hospital. That's not accessible to most of the people there. But it was that family that took care of him. And just yesterday, I understand that the settlers attacked, and every single person, including the children, are now in the hospital.
Oh my God.
In that family. And every Palestinian family will tell you a story like that.
Yes.
And it undercuts so much of what is going on here. So yes, I agree with everything you said. We know that in our synagogues all around the country that these coalitions are going on. Here we know it by the work of our movement in Israel and our political allies there. Here, but God knows we need to be more assertive and more engaged than we've ever been in both countries.
Hear, hear.
One more question there?
Last one, yeah.
Well, first, I have to just make a remark, Rabbi Saperstein. I know you probably don't remember me, but I've been working for LGBTQ rights for 25 years, and you spoke at events that I put together, and that's why I am totally agnostic, but a lot of my organizing, pro-democracy organizing this year has been with faith leaders, because I just feel people who come from a place of valuing the dignity of all life need to lead us out of this morass, whether it's in this country, Israel. So sorry, that was a little note, but thank you. But my question is, I'm not that familiar with what's going on in Israel, and given the unlikely prospect of a two-state solution, do you in your work look at what a one-state solution of a democratic state with equal rights, and is that conversation happening at all in Israel? And sorry for my ignorance on this, but I'd be really interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, Margo can talk more about this, but there are a whole range of efforts about confederation, land for all, several different entities, different formulations of what a one-state solution might look at from people who recognize that the prospects of a two-state solution are really bleak here. But if the two-state solution has any potential at all, it has to be that we have to launch a major campaign to end settler violence, to dismantle the illegal settlements, and to prevent further expansion of settlements. That's a doable political thing at this moment in history, even from people who are not going to get out to fight for the two-state solution today. But if down the long road, if you want to keep it as an option here, that's what we can get done today. And there, many of our allies in the Jewish community, from the middle of the Jewish community and the left, who have split over Gaza, can work together in that kind of campaign. And that's the kind of potential, I think, groups that are partners for peace really are at the core.
So I also want to shout out the work of A Land for All, which was recently, I believe, even as recently as last week, adopted by the Standing Together movement, also as their potential political vision, which is really seeking to harmonize the best possible outcomes of a two-state and one-state solution. We actually just did a webinar with two of their, a co-founder and their Palestinian director, and liaison to Palestinian communities, and I recommend people check it out on our website and on our YouTube. But it's incredibly thoughtful work of actually saying what we're looking for is not a new status quo, but a coming together at a table to which we can continue to evolve, and that can be receptive to people's needs on the ground, and their, like, not only their rights but their needs as both Israelis and Palestinians are articulating them, and leaving actually options open for future generations based on the potential for additional closeness, conversations, right, leaving the door open to a political horizon we at this point cannot even imagine. I will say though, I have been really surprised in that over the course of the last 2 years plus, since October 7th, 2023, I increasingly heard more sort of liberal Zionist Jews that I speak to say, I just can't imagine there could be space for a two-state solution. And I have been shocked to hear many of my Israeli and Palestinian contacts and colleagues in response saying, the only thing we could imagine right now is a two-state solution. I was in conversation with Ofer Bronstein, who's the special envoy to Emmanuel Macron on the French-Saudi initiative about the UN, and he said the point of having two states ultimately is not to say this is the final thing that we're doing forever, but it would enable recognition of a Palestinian state, would enable Israeli and Palestinian interlocutors to arrive at the table knowing that as soon as they step out in the room, the power imbalance is massive, the pain is ongoing, the wounds are open, but they would allow them to sit at the table with equal recognition and on something resembling equal footing and equal negotiating power, were we to start from a place with recognition of a Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel.
Ron, if you can permit me just a final moment here.
Sure.
I want to thank you. This is both sobering, clear-eyed, empowering, and hopeful all at once. Brilliant presentations by you both today. And Ron, a special hats off to you for being a part of this project since February with the workshop, the article in Moment magazine, the curating of several extraordinary panels, and your own insights into the thing. We're really indebted to you. And to everyone here, this isn't the end of the conversations we're having this month or next. So let's just continue forward. And you've given us marching orders, really, both of you, of how to stay connected in advocacy and engaged. So we're thrilled. We're going to have a cast party upstairs now. So thank you all so much for being here.